The pen was already inked when Charlotte Vane set it down. St. Bride's at Hollowmere held 200 people that morning, and every one of them had come to watch a widow be made respectable again. The vestry door stood open behind her. The register lay flat on the oak table, its page ruled and waiting, the fresh line of it as clean as new snow, and the vicar's thumb rested at the margin where her name was meant to go. Beside her stood Gerald Prine in a coat, the color of wet slate. His hand extended for the pen, with the patience of a man who had never once been refused. She did not take his hand. She looked at the page, instead, at the line above it where another woman had signed her life away 6 weeks earlier, and she felt her heartbeat move up into her throat and stay there. "Mrs. Vane," the vicar said. The word was wrong in her ear. It had been wrong for 11 months, ever since the morning they carried Edmund's coffin out of the north door. But it had never been wrong quite like this, spoken over a register with a pen held out to her. Behind her, from the second pew, Lady Prine's voice carried the way a voice carries when its owner intends it to. "The poor creature is overcome. She has not the education for a moment like this." The room heard it. The room agreed. To Hollowmere she was a farmer's widow with a milking parlour and £400 of debt, and a woman like that did not refuse a gentleman of Gerald's standing. She was a small brown bird that had been offered a warm cage, and the parish had decided in advance that she would be grateful at the back of the church. Near the font, a man in a navy coat had gone entirely still. Charlotte did not know his name. She knew only that he had come in late, that he had not sat, and that when Lady Prine spoke he had turned his head 1 degree toward the pew and held it there. It was nothing. It was less than nothing. Yet she felt it against her shoulder blades like a hand. She set the pen down on the register's fold, and the small wooden click of it was the loudest sound St. Bride's had made in 100 years. "I cannot sign," she said. What she did not say, what she could not have said in that room with 200 faces angled toward her, was that she had seen the line above her own. What she did not know yet was that the man at the font had seen it too, and that he had ridden 19 miles through the dark to see it, and that the reason he had ridden was a name he had not spoken aloud in 3 years. If a woman refusing a pen in a full church is the kind of moment you stay for, stay. It is going to cost her everything before it gives her anything back. The refusal took 11 seconds. The consequences took 11 months to arrive, and they had begun long before that morning. Charlotte had been 24 when Edmund Vane died, and 25 now. And in the year between, she had learned the exact weight of a milk pail carried at arm's length across frozen ground. Hollowmere Farm was 91 acres of clay and stubborn grass on the eastern edge of the Prine estate, and it had come to Edmund from his father, and to Charlotte from Edmund, and it had come to her with a debt attached, like a stone tied to a swimmer. £400. She knew the figure the way she knew her own hands. Edmund had borrowed it in the spring before the fever, against the price of a drainage scheme that would have made the Lowfield pay, and the scheme had gone into the ground with him. The note was held by Gerald, who had been kind about it in the way that a man is kind about a thing he intends to collect. She rose at 4. The dairy was 11 paces from the kitchen door, and in January, those 11 paces were the coldest of her life, and she made them with a lantern in one hand and her skirts gathered in the other, and the cows shifted and breathed in the dark before she reached them. Their names were Bess, Marigold, Juno, Peggy, Small Kate, Long Kate, Dolly, Fern, Nancy, Bramble, and one nameless heifer she had not permitted herself to name because she expected to have to sell it. She milked them in that order because Bess kicked if she was made to wait, and Juno would not stand unless Bess had gone first. She carried the pails to the dairy at arm's length so the swing of them would not slop the flags, and she set the pans and skimmed at noon, and churned on Tuesdays and pressed on Thursdays, and by 7 each morning she had eaten a heel of bread standing at the window with her thumb pressed into the crust. Her hands had gone hard across the palms, a ridge below the fingers that had not been there when Edmund was alive. Her wedding ring had worn thin enough that she had begun to feel the shape of her own finger through it, and she had taken to turning it with her thumb when she was thinking, so often that Dorcas had once put a hand over hers to stop it. She wore a gown of gray stuff that had been black once, and had gone at the elbow twice, and been turned twice, and a shawl her mother had knitted the winter before the fever took her, brown wool with a border of green that had been the only decorative thing her mother ever made. She was aware, every time she went into the village, that Hollowmere had a word for her, and the word was small. She heard it at the pump. She heard it at the door of the shop, where Mrs. Ferrars weighed her sugar and said kindly that it must be so hard for her dear, managing, and did not mean managing the farm. She heard it from the curate's wife, who told her twice in one autumn that a woman alone was a sorrow to a parish. Nobody in Hollowmere had ever been cruel to her. They had simply agreed, without malice and without consulting her, what she was, and gone on being pleasant to it. Her mother-in-law was gone. Her father was gone. What she had was Mrs. Dorcas Vale, who had kept house for Edmund's father, and stayed on for no wages after the funeral because, she said, somebody had to see that Charlotte ate. Dorcas was 61, had a face like a walnut, and a memory like a ledger, and she was the only person in the parish who called Charlotte by her given name. "You are wanted at the great house," Dorcas said one morning in October, holding out a card on a tray she had polished, for no reason at all. "Himself has written it in his own hand. That is meant to flatter you." The card said that Mr. Prime requested the pleasure of Mrs. Vane at dinner on Thursday. "I have nothing to wear to a dinner. You have the gray. Wear it, and let them look." She wore the gray. She walked the 1.5 miles because there was no carriage, and she came into a dining room lit with 40 candles where the table seated 20, and the silver had been laid so that each fork threw its own small piece of light. Lady Prine sat at the head. She was Gerald's mother, 70 years old, straight-backed, and she wore a fan she held at a height Charlotte would come to understand as a measurement of contempt. There was a young woman at Gerald's right in ice blue silk, Miss Arabella Hurst, of the Hursts at Ashford, whose father had 6,000 a year, and whose hair had been arranged by someone whose entire employment was the arranging of hair. And there was a man at the far end, lone, not eating. "His Grace, the Duke of Ferrodine," Gerald said in the voice of a man displaying a purchase. "He has taken Marlow Hall for the winter. His Grace does not dine out. We are honored." The Duke inclined his head 1/2 inch. He was tall, black-haired, with a scar through his right brow that had healed white, and he wore navy so well cut that it looked less like clothing than like weather. He did not smile. He looked at Charlotte for the length of one breath and then away, and Charlotte, who had spent a year being looked past, felt the difference and did not know what to do with it. The soup came. Lady Prine turned her fan a 1/4 inch. "Mrs. Vane keeps cows," she said to the table pleasantly. "It is astonishing what a woman will do when she has no education for anything better. A dairymaid with a marriage certificate. One does admire the persistence." The table laughed the way a table laughs when its hostess has made a joke. Arabella's hand went to her throat in a small gesture of sympathy that was not sympathy at all. Charlotte set her spoon down without a sound. But she looked at Lady Prine and said nothing, because she had learned that a year of saying nothing was cheaper than a minute of saying something, and because Dorcas was owed 11 months of wages, and Charlotte had not the money to be proud with. At the far end of the table, the Duke of Ferrodine picked up his glass. He did not drink from it. He held it for a moment, set it down untouched, and the small ring of crystal on wood cut across the laughter and ended it. "Mrs. Mukta." "Vane," he said, his voice low, "you are seated in a draught. Move to the chair beside mine." It was not a request. It had the flat construction of an order given on a parade ground, and Charlotte's face went hot with what she was certain was humiliation. And she rose and moved, because a duke had told her to, and one did not argue with dukes. She sat. She was very aware of the 6 inches between his sleeve and hers. Her pulse had gone quick and strange in her wrists, and she could not think why. The draught, when she considered it afterward, walking home under a sky full of hard stars, had been on the other side of the room entirely. She did not understand, then, that she had been moved out of the line of fire. The dinner was on a Thursday. On the Saturday, Gerald came to Hollowmere Farm and asked her to marry him, standing in her own dairy with his boots in the wet. He did it well. He was 36 and handsome in a broad, well-fed way. And he spoke about the £400 as if it were a small unpleasantness that a wedding would tidy away. He spoke about the low field and the drainage, and how it might be done properly with capital behind it. He did not once say that he loved her, and Charlotte respected him a little for that. And then he said the other thing. "You will not have a better offer, Mrs. Vane, at your age, in your circumstances. I am telling you the truth because you are a sensible woman." "Yes," she said, "I am." She asked for a month. He gave her 3 weeks and rode away pleased. That night she sat with Dorcas at the kitchen fire and turned Edmund's ring on her finger until the skin under it went white. "You'll say yes," Dorcas said. It was not a question, and it was not a judgment. "I will say yes." "Then say it with your eyes open, girl. That family has a way of arranging things and calling it Providence." What she did not say, and what Charlotte did not ask, was how Dorcas came to know the Prynes so well. Dorcas had been in service at the great house for 9 years before she came to the Vanes. She had never once said why she left. The Duke of Farrodine came to the farm 8 days later, and he did not announce himself. She was in the low field. The rain had come in hard from the west, and the drain at the corner had backed, and the water was standing over the grass, and Charlotte was in it to her ankles with a spade, cutting a channel by hand, because there was nobody else to cut it, and because if the field flooded she lost the hay. She did not hear the horse. She heard him say her name, and she turned with the spade still in her hands and her hem black to the knee, and her hair coming down, and there was a duke standing at the gate of her flooded field in a coat worth more than her house. "Come out of the water," he said. "I have 3 yards left." "Come out of the water, Mrs. Vane." "Your Grace." She pushed the wet hair off her forehead with the back of her wrist. "If I come out now, the field goes. I have 11 cows and no hay for them and no money for hay. So I will finish the channel, and then I will come out, and I will be very sorry that you had to wait." There was a silence. The rain came down on both of them. Then the Duke of Farrodine climbed the gate of Hollowmere Farm, took the spade out of her hands, and cut the last 3 yards of the channel himself, in navy superfine, in the rain, while she stood in the water and watched him do it. He did not speak while he worked. When the water found the cut and began to run, he handed the spade back to her, and his glove was ruined, and his boots were ruined, and there was mud to his thigh. "Your husband was Edmund Vane," he said. "Yes. He borrowed £400 from Gerald in the spring of the year he died." Her hands closed on the spade handle. "How do you know that? Go inside. You are shaking." "I am not shaking because I am cold." He looked at her then, properly. For longer than a man in his position had any business looking at a farmer's widow in a flooded field. Something moved in his face and was put away again, and she watched it go. And she thought with the flat certainty of a woman who has been taught her own value by experts, "He is a duke, and I am a joke. He is being kind to." "Go inside," he said, and got on his horse and rode away, and she stood in the running water for a long time after the sound of him was gone. Her mouth had said that she was not cold. Her hands had said something else entirely, and they had said it while he was watching. He came back. That was the part she could not account for. He came on the Tuesday with a cartload of hay and a note that said the hay was owed against a debt from the previous tenant, which was a lie so transparent that Dorcas laughed out loud in the yard and had to go in and sit down. "There is no previous tenant," Charlotte said to the carter. "No, Mrs." The carter agreed comfortably and went on unloading. He came on the Friday and stood in the dairy doorway for 20 minutes while Charlotte pressed cheese. She counted, afterward, the words that had passed between them, and made it 41. He had asked what the wheel weighed. She had told him. He had asked how many she made in a week, and how long they must sit, and what she got for them at Ashford, and she had answered all of it. And he had listened the way a man listens who intends to remember, and then he had said good day and gone. She had stood with her hands in the curd, for a full minute afterward, understanding nothing. He came on a morning when Dorcas had the ague, and found Charlotte doing the housework as well as the milking. On 4 hours of sleep, with a burn on her wrist from the copper and her sleeves pushed up like a servant's. There was a cold end of yesterday's loaf on the board, and nothing else in the house. "Sit down and eat something," he said in that same flat parade ground voice. "I have the dairy to do. Sit down, Mrs. Vane." She was so tired that she sat. She ate the bread because a duke had told her to, and she was ashamed of the burn and of the sleeves and of the state of the table, and he stood at the window with his back to her the entire time, looking out at nothing, so that she might eat unobserved in her own kitchen. When she had finished, he said good day without turning around, and left. And it was 3 hours before she understood that he had turned his back on purpose. Every visit, her body knew where he was in the room. She would be at the churn with her back to the door, and she would know, from nothing, from the quality of the silence that he had come in. Her mind called it nonsense. Her breath disagreed. And every visit she catalogued the reasons. It meant nothing. He was bored. He was a widower, with a winter to fill. He pitied her. Men of that rank collected small dependents the way they collected hounds, and she would not be a hound, and she would not let herself think for one moment that a man who had ruined a pair of boots in her field had done it for any reason that touched her. She said none of this to anyone. She said yes to Gerald on the 21st day, in the drawing room of the great house, with Lady Prynne present, and Arabella arranged at the window like a piece of the furniture. "How sensible!" Lady Prynne said, and turned her fan. "The dairymaid does know her interest after all." That was the second time. The banns were read for 3 Sundays. Charlotte sat in the Vane pew each time, and listened to her own name said aloud in a church, and felt nothing at all, and afterward, the parish came and pressed her hands and told her how fortunate she was. And she agreed with all of them. If you have ever agreed with a room in order to get out of it, you know exactly what that Sunday cost her. Stay with her. The cost has not finished. The witnessing happened on the second Sunday, and Charlotte did not know she was being witnessed. Sarah Pike was 19, a dairymaid at the great house, and she had been dismissed on the Saturday for breaking a Severus cup. Dismissed without a character, which in that parish meant dismissed into nothing at all. Charlotte found her sitting on the wall at the crossroads with a bundle at her feet at 6 in the morning, having been there since 4, and she did not ask any questions. The girl had not cried. That was what stayed with Charlotte. Sarah sat on a wall in the cold with everything she owned in a bundle at her feet and her hands folded in her lap. And when Charlotte asked her what had happened, she said, in a perfectly level voice, that she had broken a cup and had no character, and supposed she would walk to Ashford and see. She was 19. Her mother had a cough that had lasted since Michaelmas. She had 8 pence. Charlotte knew exactly what the girl was doing, because she had been doing it herself for 11 months. She was being sensible about it. She was being sensible so that nobody would have to be embarrassed by her. She took her home. She fed her, standing over her until the plate was empty, and put her by the fire with Dorcas. And then she put on her bonnet and walked the 1.5 miles back to the great house in her grey gown with her heart going like a bird in her chest. She was made to wait 50 minutes in a passage. She stood the whole time because there was one chair and it was not offered. A footman went by twice and looked through her. Then she was told that her ladyship would hear her, and she was told, when she reached the door of the yellow room, to say what she had come to say from the doorway, rather than inside the room. Sarah Pike broke a cup, Charlotte said. She did not break it out of malice, and she is a good worker, and she has a mother in Ashford who is sick. I am asking you to take her back. And if I do not, then I will keep her and pay her out of the dairy money, and I will tell anyone who asks why she left. Lady Prynne's fan stopped. You are about to become my son's wife. You will find that gives you a great deal to lose. Yes, Charlotte said. It does. She walked home. Sarah stayed at Hollowmere, and the dairy money would not stretch to a wage. So Charlotte sold her mother's shawl in Ashford Market for 9 shillings, and did not tell anybody. And she went cold that winter in a way she had not gone cold before. The Duke of Ferrodine had been in the passage. He had come to the great house on an errand about a lease, and he had stood in the shadow at the turn of the corridor for the length of that exchange, and he had heard a woman with 400 pounds of debt threaten the only future she had over a dairymaid and a broken cup. He did not step out. He did not say anything. He rode back to Marlowe Hall and sat in his library until the fire went out. She learned about the wound by accident, and by then it was too late to protect herself from what it did to her. It was late November. He had come with a book she had not asked for, which was itself absurd, and she had made him tea because there was nothing else in the house to offer a duke, and he had drunk it, which was more absurd still. Dorcas had gone up. The fire was low. And Charlotte, wiping the table, saw him put his hand flat against his breast pocket, briefly, the way a man checks that a thing is still there. He caught her seeing it. For a moment, she thought he would leave. Then he took it out. It was a miniature, painted on ivory, the frame worn smooth at one edge from 3 years of a thumb passing over it, and it showed a young woman with fair hair and a slightly crooked smile. Eleanor, he said, my wife. He had married her at 28. She had been ill for 2 years before the end, and the physicians had told him that the air at Ferrodine was killing her, that she must go south, that she must go before the winter closed the roads. And he had been in London that autumn, contesting a claim on the estate, because his uncle had brought a suit that would have taken the land from him, and he had believed with the whole of his disciplined and orderly mind that he had time. He had written to her that he would come at the end of the month. He had won the suit on the 3rd of December. She had died on the 29th of November, at Ferrodine, in the cold, waiting for a letter that said he was coming. He said all of that in perhaps 11 sentences, level without once raising his voice, and then he put the miniature back in his pocket and did not mention it again. Charlotte's hand was still on the table. She did not move it. I do not tell that story, he said. No, I have told it once in 3 years. She understood, standing in her own kitchen with a cloth in her hand, that a man does not ruin his boots in a stranger's field. She understood that he had been coming for 6 weeks. She understood, and her mind refused it in the same instant, because the alternative was to hope, and hope was the one thing in her life she could not afford to buy on credit. He stood. At the door he stopped and he said, Charlotte. Not Mrs. Vane, not Mrs. Anything. It went through her like cold water. She stood in the kitchen for a long time after the door closed, and her hands were not steady, and there was nobody there to see it, which was a mercy, because she could not have explained it to anyone. He did not ask her to break the engagement. He did not say a word against it. She told herself that this was the answer, and that the answer was no. 3 days before the wedding, Charlotte found out why the wedding existed. Dorcas brought it, and Dorcas had been 9 years in that house, and Dorcas had left because of a thing she had seen and never told. The drainage scheme in the low field had not been Edmund's idea. It had been Gerald's. Gerald had surveyed Hollowmere's 91 acres in the spring of that year, and found what a prine looks for. The low field sat over a seam of good brick clay, 4 feet deep and running the length of the boundary, and a brickworks on that seam with the canal 3 miles off would return the 400 pounds in a single season. Gerald had lent Edmund the money for a drainage scheme he knew would fail, secured against the land, and had sat down to wait. The note was callable at 18 months. The 18 months ended in February. He does not want you, Dorcas said in the kitchen, with the fire baking shapes on her walnut face. He wants the clay. And he cannot foreclose on you without the parish saying he is a hard man, because you are a widow, and the parish is fond of a widow. Marry you, and the land is his by law, and everyone calls it a kindness. How do you know? Because I carried the surveyor's coat, and I heard what he said in the passage. And I gave notice the same week, and I have been ashamed of my silence for 4 years. The old woman's hands were shaking. I am not ashamed of it any more. There is a copy of the survey. He had 2 made. His mother keeps hers in the escritoire in the yellow room. because she does not trust him with paper. Charlotte sat down very slowly. She had 2 days. She could not steal from Lady Prynne. She could not accuse without proof, and proof was in a locked escritoire in a house she would enter for the first time as a bride. What she could do, she did. She wrote to the Duke of Faradine and asked him one question in one sentence, and sent Sarah 19 miles with it, and did not sleep. He did not answer. That was the thing that broke her. Not the clay, not Gerald, not the 400 pounds. He did not answer. Lady Prynne came to Hollowmere Farm on the eve of the wedding. She came in a carriage, and she did not get out of it, and she made Charlotte stand in her own yard in the wind and receive her. "His Grace has left Marlow Hall," she said pleasantly, "this morning. For London, I believe, or for wherever such men go when the entertainment is finished. I thought you would rather hear it from me than from the village. The cold went all the way down." "I do not know why you would think that concerns me," Charlotte said. "Because you have been letting a duke into your dairy, my dear, and the whole parish has counted the visits." The fan came up, half an inch too high, and stopped. "You are a dairymaid with a ring on." He was passing the time. "Tomorrow you will marry my son, and you will have a roof and a name and more than you have ever deserved. And in 30 years, you will be grateful I said this to you plainly." The carriage went. Charlotte stood in the yard until the sound of it had gone off the lane. And out of the parish, and out of the world. That was the 3rd time. She went into the dairy, and she put her hands flat on the cold stone of the press, and she stood there. And Sarah found her an hour later still standing, and neither of them said anything. And Sarah put a shawl over her shoulders and went away again. He had not answered. He had gone. Every single thing she had ever been taught about her own worth had been confirmed by the only man who had ever seemed to contradict it, and she had 200 people coming to a church in the morning, and there was nothing left to do but the thing she had agreed to do. She said one sentence out loud in the empty dairy, and it was the only self-pitying thing she said in 11 months, and she said it to nobody. I would only have wanted him to say it. Then she washed her face and went to bed, and at 4 she got up and milked 11 cows, because they did not know it was her wedding day. St. Bride's was full by 10. They had put her in a gown of Lady Prynne's choosing, cream-colored borrowed, too long in the sleeve, and she had walked up the aisle past 200 faces that had all decided in advance how she should feel. Gerald was pleasant. The vicar was thorough. She said the words when the words were required of her, and her voice did not shake. And Lady Prynne sat in the 2nd pew with her fan closed for the first time in her life. And then they went into the vestry, and the register was opened, and she looked down at the page. 6 weeks earlier, on that same page, a hand she knew had signed as witness at another wedding. Gerald's own hand in the line above. And beside it, in the column where the parish clerk noted the parties, was the entry for a marriage in the Prynne Chapel, and the name of the bride was Arabella Hurst. She read it twice. Then she understood. Marriage settlements are contracts. Arabella had married Gerald's cousin, and the Hurst money had gone into the Prynne estate, and Gerald had witnessed it, and Gerald had needed $6,000 a year to service what he owed on the strength of a brickworks that did not exist yet on land he did not own yet. He had run out of time. The note was callable in February. He was not marrying a widow to be kind. He was not even marrying her to be cruel. He was marrying her because on the 16th of February a bank in Norwich would ask him a question, and he intended to answer it with her clay. The whole machine of it lay on the page in the parish clerk's copperplate. The pen was already inked when Charlotte Vane set it down. "I cannot sign," she said. The vestry went silent. Gerald's hand stayed extended for a moment longer than was dignified. "Charlotte," he said, "you are tired. You surveyed my husband's low field in April. You lent him 400 pounds against a scheme you knew would fail, because there is brick clay under my hay and the canal is 3 miles off. The note is callable in February. I am not tired, Mr. Prynne. I am late." Somebody in the church had stood up. The vestry door was open, and the church heard all of it, every word, in the acoustics that St. Bride's had been built with in 1406. "That is a slander," Gerald said. "You have no proof of a word of it." "No," said the Duke of Ferrodine from the back of the church, "she does not." "I do." He had ridden from Norwich. He had left Marlow Hall at 4 on the Thursday morning without a word to anyone, because Charlotte's letter had asked him one question. And the question was, who holds the note? And the answer was not Gerald at all. The answer was a bank, and the bank had bought the paper from Gerald 11 months ago at a discount, and Gerald had been servicing it since. And a man may look at a purchase note if he arrives at the bank in person and is a duke. He came up the aisle in his riding coat, mud to the knee, 3 days unshaven, and he did not hurry. In his hand was a folded document with a bank's seal on it and a surveyor's copy pinned to it, obtained from the escritoire in the Yellow Room by an old housekeeper who had been ashamed of her silence for 4 years and had walked in the front door of the great house that morning and asked for her old key back and been given it because nobody looks twice at Dorcas Whale. He laid the paper on the register. The room turned. 200 faces, all at once, the way a field of grass turns in wind. Lady Pryne's fan opened and did not move. Her mouth opened and shut. "Gerald," she said. "Gerald, tell them." The syllables came out 3 times, and each one was smaller than the last, and the woman who had ruled that parish for 50 years heard her own son say nothing at all, and understood in that silence exactly what she had spent the autumn defending. The Duke of Ferrodine crossed the last 3 yards of the vestry, and stopped in front of Charlotte, and the church waited, and he did not raise his voice. "I am not passing the time. Marry me instead." 8 words, and a name of nothing. He did not kneel. He did not explain. He stood in a ruined coat in front of the parish that had spent 11 months, deciding she was small, and he waited for her answer with his hands at his sides and his face open for the first time since Eleanor died. And every person in that church saw it happen. Charlotte did not answer for the length of 6 seconds. Then she put her hand in his, and her palm was hard across the top from a year of pails, and she felt him feel it, and she felt him not care at all. The vicar closed the register. Gerald Pryne left through the north door and out of the parish inside a fortnight, the note called by a bank that had read a surveyor's report and drawn its own conclusions. The low field never cut. Arabella wrote from Ashford within a month. A short letter in a small hand, and the only line of it that mattered said that she had been at the Pryne Chapel in October, and had wondered ever since why nobody had asked her a single question. Charlotte wrote back and asked her 3, and they were friends for 40 years. Lady Pryne sent no letter. She sent, in April, a cutting of a white rose from the great house garden with a card that said nothing but the name of the rose. Charlotte planted it by the dairy door. It was not an apology. It was the nearest thing that woman had ever made, and Charlotte, who had been forgiven nothing by anybody, chose to accept it. The wedding was in January, at St. Bride's, and there were 9 people in the church. Dorcas stood as witness, and signed her name in a hand that had not signed anything in 20 years. Sarah held the flowers. The vicar was thorough again, and this time when the register was opened, Charlotte took the pen and signed it without hesitating. And the ink was the same ink, and the page was the same page, and it was not the same thing at all. They kept Hallowmere. That was her condition, and he did not argue it. The 11 cows stayed. The low field was drained properly, in the spring at his expense and to her design, and it grew hay for 30 years, and no brick was ever made from it. She went on rising at 4 for the first year out of habit, and then stopped. And the stopping took her longer than the rising ever had. The first snow of the new winter came in November, on the 29th. She found him in the library at Marlow Hall, with no candle lit, sitting in the dark with the fire going down. And she knew the date before she was through the door. She did not say anything about it. She sat on the floor by his chair, the way no duchess in England sat, and she put her head against his knee. and after a while his hand came down and settled in her hair and stayed there. The miniature was on the table beside him, face up, the frame worn smooth at one edge. "You may say her name," Charlotte said in this house. "Whenever you want it," said. He was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor," he said. Outside, the snow went on falling into the dark of the park, and the fire settled, and somewhere below them a door closed, and Dorcas's voice said something short to somebody in the passage. He turned the miniature face down at last, not to hide it, only to rest it. Then he lifted Charlotte's hand off her lap and held it up in the last of the firelight, and looked at the hard ridge across her palm that a year of pails had put there. And he kissed it once, in the middle where the work had been. She did not take her hand back. "Thank you for staying to the end of it. If Charlotte's refusal moved you, sit with it a moment before you go, and let it be quiet.